and author and presidential candidate for these United States of America, Marianne Williamson.
You are so wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I love you.
I love you too. Hello. Thank you, Triana. Thank you. And thank you for putting together this marvelous group of people. I feel very honored. Just everything I have heard here, both the things that people have spoken here on the podium or on panels or just in conversation, makes me realize that in a very real way, philosophically and spiritually, I'm home today. And everything that has been spoken has particular relevance for me, not only because of my belief system, but because of my current experience as a presidential candidate. I felt before I ran for president that I had a pretty good grasp certainly of anti-Semitism, and I even felt I had a pretty good grasp of racism as much as a white person could have, at least in terms of recognizing the external systems that hold people down. But I never knew misogyny until I ran for president in a way that shows me how deeply embedded some of the dynamics are that keep women from rising up. And it's interesting, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the brilliant poetess in red that spoke so profoundly, but you named it in a very interesting way when you were talking about Rapunzel and Hansel and Gretel. If a woman is young and pretty, she's too lightweight to have anything serious to say. If she's older, she's the wicked witch. So there's no point at which the system, and when I say the system, what I think we've all come to realize is that the system is not just reflected in external dynamics politically, socially, and economically, addressed by things such as the ERA, but there are also internal systems of thought and feeling. And so in order to dismantle an unjust world, we must address dismantling in terms of our own thoughts, in terms of our own feelings, and in terms of our own behavior. Actually, it was Martin Luther King who said that in order to achieve the beloved community, we must have external changes in our circumstances, but also qualitative shifts in our souls. So we're living at a time of a revolutionary dynamic, and that revolutionary dynamic is going to break one way or the other. There are so many, what I've learned in my career, both running for president, but also long before that as well. There are rooms like this room all over this country, and I think that's what we want to start with. You would look at the media, and you would look at so much of what is happening politically in this country, and think that those of us who think and feel and talk the way we think, feel, and talk in this room are the minority. The truth is, the thoughts and feelings that have been expressed here today and the kinds of policy changes that would reflect those thoughts and feelings are actually agreed upon by a majority of the American people. If I have learned anything, it's that the people are not the problem. The problem is a sclerotic political system that is so dominated and so unduly influenced by corporate donors rather than the actual people of the United States, thank you, that the system itself has become a system of legalized bribery. So that over and over and over again, legislators do more to do the will of their corporate donors than to do the expressed will of their own constituencies. The safety, the health, and the well-being of the American people, of our children, of our planet, of our descendants. And I'm running for president because I feel, as Triana said, and as everybody, obviously with your applause made clear you agree, it's time to shut it down. But we have to be very sophisticated in talking about exactly what that means. Because it's not an easy thing to shut down. It's not an easy thing to smash that machine, especially if you are really interested in what it will take to fundamentally change things. Then you know a few things. Number one, this must be a nonviolent revolution. It must be peaceful. It must be elegant. It must be all the things that we want the world to be. That's number one. And number two, we should not kid ourselves about how difficult it is to make fundamental reform. It's not an accident here in Atlanta. It's not an accident. I mean, it's a serendipitous thing, but in some larger sense, don't you just love that the prosecutor here in Atlanta that is bringing Trump to accountability is a woman? And I'm sure that some of you have an added pleasure of knowing it is a black woman. Congratulations to you all. But it's not just the Trump indictments that are making Atlanta a hot spot today. I hope you all realize that Stop Cop City is a national story. It's not just here in Atlanta. Cop City is a template for a police state. Yes. And I really want to acknowledge all of the people, all of the work being done right now to stop it. Because if it happens in Atlanta, that is a template that they are already planning to replicate throughout this country. So kudos to all of you. Kudos to the citizens of Atlanta who are standing up to something that is actually very, very dangerous. Now, in order for us to fundamentally change things, we're going to have to become very, very savvy. We're going to have to recognize that the systems that we had thought were there to help us in trying to reform the country are not necessarily the friends that we thought they were. We have one major political party that doesn't even pretend to agree with us, but we have the corporatist leadership of the other major political party that does pretend to agree with us. And that's the problem that we have on our hands. Because in the Democratic Party, just as in the Republican Party, there's a fissure between what many of us grew up to think of the two major parties and another group. The progressives, it was already mentioned earlier today when they were talking about the ERA. They were talking about Cori Bush, and they were talking about Ayanna Pressley, and they were talking about other progressives who are trying to pass a bill about the ERA. Do you ever wonder why they're not here? Do you ever wonder why they're not running for president? Do you ever wonder why the Democratic Party has become so performative? Do you really think that they think that given the current corporatist leadership of the Democratic Party, that's going to get anywhere? No, they know it won't. It will get them tweets. And with their tweets, we'll all think, wow, we really got a lot of help in Congress. And it's really time, I believe, for a lot of women particularly, to kind of, when you say to a friend, honey, he's just not who you think he is. So I know a lot of people have said to me about running for president, why are you doing this? And I'm like, why do I have to do this? Where are they? Where are they? Where are all those people? So, and I'll tell you where they are. Once you're in that system, you get sucked in. And either Nancy or Hakeem clearly give you their cell phone number. And you're told, and I'm sure that's exactly what happened with quite a few of them, Ilan, et cetera. When you saw her walking down the stairs with Nancy, you just knew what Nancy had said to her. Honey, I was just like you when I was younger. And we're going to get there, okay? How many years before we realize that when these people say we're going to get there, really? Because they could have codified Roe v. Wade a long time ago. Really, because they could have raised the minimum wage and not let the parliamentarians stop him. And President Biden could have called the archivist and said, publish that thing. And it's time for us to stop acting like little girls and pretending otherwise. Thank you. Thank you. Until we make that change, we can say, oh, we're going to shut it down. But as long as you're shutting it down, but at the same time going along, you can't shut it down and go along at the same time. There has to be a decision now. There has to be a decision among us that recognizes this is not going to be easy. And I can tell you as someone who is running for president, as vicious as you think the institutional resistance to someone who is speaking beyond the predetermined conversation is, as vicious as you might think it is, it's even worse. And it's much worse now than it was 4 years ago. They have decided what the predetermined agenda is. And the predetermined agenda is a corporatist agenda in which short-term profits for insurance companies and pharmaceutical companies and food companies and chemical companies and agricultural companies and gun manufacturers and big oil and defense contractors, those profits come first. One party is a little bit better. Enough is enough with a little bit better. And when it comes to big oil and when it comes to defense contractors, they're not even different. They all just stand in line. Now, we are women. We are sisters. We are mothers. And there are also, let us not kid ourselves. First of all, I want to point out, nothing I'm saying here today you don't already know. I might be saying a statistic here or a statistic there that you don't know. It's time for us to own what we know. The era of data collection is over. We know. We don't need, it's like when they talk about HR 40, that's a perfect example. Reparations is a perfect example. Congressman John Conyers from Detroit was a friend of mine. I raised my daughter in Detroit. If John Conyers were alive today, he would be the first one to roll his eyes. We don't need another study. We kind of know what happened. And if they don't know what happened, get that brilliant poetess in there, because she'll tell you what happened. We don't need another study, and we don't need another president who says, I really think H.R. 4 to study the evidence of what slavery did, long-term economic effects on black people in the United States. We should really have that study. And I'm going to throw it over to Congress, because Congress should do it. And then everybody gets to act like they're so on our side. Wake up, girls. Wake up. Because actually, we already know what happened. And we know how many American children are dying. We know how many carcinogens are in our food. We know that 1 in 4 Americans live with medical debt. We know that 18 million Americans cannot afford to pay the prescriptions that their doctors give them. We know that 68,000 Americans die of lack of health care every year. We know, by the way, that even though there's an $88 billion medical debt, the top 5 pharmaceutical companies last year alone made $80 billion in profit. And we know that 1/3 of America's workers live on less than $15 an hour, and half of them cannot afford a place to live. And we know that 1.3 million Americans are rationing their insulin. And we know that in every other advanced democracy, they have universal health care. They don't have people putting up on GoFundMe pages on the internet in order to pay for life-saving operations for their children and other loved ones. I have doctors in this country who say to me, now 2 of them have said, I don't even know why I bother to practice medicine anymore. I tell people what they need, they come in, I tell them, but the people had enough, their insurance covered the doctor's visit, but the insurance won't cover the medicine. Or the insurance won't cover the treatment. Dr. Virginia Dooley in Detroit said to me, the most common question I used to get from patients was when I would tell them a treatment, the most common question I used to get was, what are the side effects? Today, the most common question is, what will it cost? And the only reason we don't have universal health care are these same people who act like they care. And they care, but they care within the construct of their unwillingness to challenge the underlying corporate forces that make the return of all this human suffering inevitable season after season, year after year, election after election. And so they will tell you that the reason we don't have universal health care is because it's complicated. And I'm here to share with you that we all ought to say what we all know. No, it's not complicated, it's just corrupt. And people are rationing their insulin because of the greed of the pharmaceutical companies. There are carcinogens in our food because of big food and big ag. There are chemicals in our pesticide that hurt children's brains because of big chemical companies. We are continuing, and you know, I don't want to get personal around it, but it should be said that there is a president who calls himself the climate president. Really? So the climate president, because of the healthy investments in green energy that are in the Inflation Reduction Act, and I want to give credit where credit is due. However, that same president also approved the Willow Project, an $8 billion ConocoPhillips oil extraction project on the North Slopes of Alaska. And you put that together with the fact that he's actually given more oil drilling permits than even Trump did. And all of the effects, all of the benefits of the clean energy investments are nullified. This is what I most resent. They act like they think we're stupid.
That's right. Yeah.
That's what I most resent. I don't like condescending men. And when an entire political system reflects that kind of patriarchal condescension, you better believe it. It's time for a woman, it's time for millions of women to say very elegantly and very, very wisely and very, very compassionately, that shit really needs to stop now. But it is not easy. It is not easy, actually, because you ask, well, who am I supposed to vote for? Do I vote for Cornell? Do I vote for Marianne? Do I vote for Biden? I'm not saying it's an easy question, but I am saying this. I have become convinced, or I would not be here, that the status quo will not disrupt itself. Nope. It is absurd. And, I'm a white woman, so I can only know as much as you can know from without a system, but I can tell you this. Given that Black Lives Matter was the biggest protest movement in the history of the United States, it really says a lot that there has not been one serious bipartisan police reform legislative bill passed yet. No, something is really, 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 really wrong, and they are not going to change it. And I've learned as a candidate just what we all know, as I said, what the resistance is. However, I want to go back to the first thing I said. There are more of us than there are of them. But not if we keep going along, not if we continue our codependent relationship with everything from the Democratic Party to the entire political establishment. If they say that the candidate, that the Democratic Party is not even going to have debates? Really? Because the Republicans had debates the other night. Did you notice that? They had debates. It's very weird about the Republicans and the Democrats. The Democrats have the more egalitarian policies, but an almost more elitist relationship with its own constituency. The Republicans have the elitist policies, but a weirdly more egalitarian relationship with its own constituency. Republican voters don't say, well, I'll do whatever the RNC says. And we shouldn't just do whatever the DNC says. So I'd like to just say a little civics lesson here about the part the political parties are supposed to play. Political parties are supposed to stand in the background until the voters have decided. It's this radical concept called democracy. It's this radical concept where the voters are supposed to decide who the candidate is, and at that point, the political parties come in. But, many people, I've had an experience here that I have almost every day. Somebody comes up to me and says, oh, my kids love you. My 20-year-old told me all about you. What is that about? It is a phenomenon. I'll tell you what it is. In the New York Times poll, I'm only 7 points behind President Biden with Gen Z. He's at 34, I'm at 27, and Bobby Kennedy is at 13. Why is it? First of all, it does have to do with the fact I stand for universal health care, tuition-free college and tech school, which we had until the 70s. Every other advanced democracy had universal health care. We should cancel those college loans because they should never have existed to begin with. That was vulture capitalism at its worst. Let's look to the kids, particularly people of color, who were desperate to spread their wings and self-actualize. Ooh, I bet we could get some money from them. They know that there's great profit wherever there is human despair. And we should have free childcare, as in other countries, and we should have paid family leave, as in other countries, and we should have guaranteed housing, and we should have guaranteed living wage, as in every other country. We have been trained to limit our political imaginations. We have been trained to expect too little. We've been trained to just go along, and that's the first thing that a woman has to do. She has to learn to say, no, thank you, darling, we're going to do it differently now. Not with anger, but with sisterhood. and we're simply not going to stand for it. But when we say something like shut it down, we have to know what we're talking about. And it has to be on the primary levels. It has to be on the primary levels for congressional, has to be on the primary levels for the Senate, and it has to be on the primary level for the presidential candidate. Otherwise, nothing is going to seriously change. And the corporatists will continue, the Republicans will do nothing except a nosedive for our democracy, and the corporatist Democrats will look over a managed decline of our democracy. We are headed for the iceberg. The Republicans headed right there, the corporatist Democrats more slowly, and will hit it at another angle. As in every system, there is nothing like the power of women to say, no, we're actually going to turn this ship around. So it's early in the campaign season. I'm just grateful to have the opportunity to be here to talk about these things. And I'm not saying even in terms of my campaign asking for your vote, but I am grateful for your listening today. We are early in the season, and I am asking you to consider that there's something very, very wrong when CNN will not have someone on. And MSNBC will not have someone on. Do not kid yourself. MSNBC and CNN are for the Democratic Party no different than Fox is for the GOP. And it's wrong. It's standing in the way of our democracy. Now, when Triana was talking, she was mentioning my quote from my book, A Return to Love. And why has that quote struck a nerve? That quote has struck a nerve in this country, really in many places, because it speaks to the possibility of self-actualization. It speaks to the possibility that anyone should be able to spread their wings. It speaks to the idea that there is divine power and potential, unlimited divine potential within every human being. And we all want to be reminded of that because it then gives us permission to live it. Before I leave, I just want to point out that that's what the Declaration of Independence says too. That is the message of the Declaration of Independence, that all men are created equal, and that all men are given the inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. They didn't use words like self-actualization then, but that's what was said. And those 56 men who signed that declaration were risking their lives to imbue the founding of our country with the space of that ideal. That's where it began. A radical possibility, radical then and radical now. But no one in this room needs to be reminded what went along with that. 41 of the 56 signers were slave owners. That dichotomy and that struggle has always been with us, and it is with us now. It is the struggle between those of us who really get, there's something really profound about anybody being able to do it, anybody being able to thrive, anybody being able to spread their wings, anybody having the shackles of material disadvantage, and even emotional, spiritual, and psychological disadvantage removed so that they can become all that God created them to potentially be. But there have also been forces throughout our history. They were here at the beginning. To be honest, they're here now. For their own economic and ideological purposes, have no intention whatsoever of seeing those principles actualized. But if you look at the trajectory of American history, we have pushed them back. Every single generation lives out its iteration of that story and of that struggle. But we responded to slavery with abolition, and we responded to the institutional suppression of women with the women's suffragist movement. We responded to the first Gilded Age with the establishment of organized labor. We responded to segregation in the American South with the civil rights movement. It's simply our turn. It's simply the next stage of things. It's simply taking where they got it right and making it better because the job was not completed. No former generation owes us anything. It's our turn now. It's our turn now. And that is what it means to me to say we will not stop. We cannot stop. Yes, they passed the Voting Rights Act, but they've also gutted it. Yes, they passed the Civil Rights Act, and now it's time to go forward the conversation about economic reparations, etc. Yes, they passed the 19th Amendment. Now it's time to pass the ERA. Yes, there was the establishment of organized labor, and now there's a regeneration of organized labor because it's been suppressed. And if I may submit to you, it's time for a mother in the White House, and you can take that however you want to. It is time. It is time for a woman who comes up from the conversation that is in this room. Enough is enough. But it will not happen if we continue to elect the status quo. They're not going to give it to us, girls. They're not going to give it to us. And it was also pointed out that this isn't even, listen, Betty Ford, she was a Republican, and she fought for the ERA. Yep. This is not about left versus right. This is not about Democrat versus Republican. That's all a ruse. The real dichotomy in America today is between the powerful and the powerless, between those who have capital and easy access to capital and those who are simply struggling to survive. Not every rich person in this country is a greedy bastard. Not every poor person is holy and pure. So we must not make this about personalities. We must make it about principles. It's not about people. You don't want to demonize people. It is about systems, however. But those systems will not change unless we change them. My message to all of you is, come on, girls, let's do this. Thank you very, very, very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you.